America is in real trouble. Adams was right. The wars did not make America great. The wars. 3,000 people were killed on September 11th, 2001. As Paul Wolfowitz admitted, the main reason Osama bin Laden cited for attacking America was the U.S. military bases left in Saudi Arabia for the so-called dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran in the 1990s after Iraq War I, the Persian Gulf War. Bin Laden's plan was to provoke the United States into invading Afghanistan so he could replicate the Mujahideen's earlier success against the USSR with U.S. support in the 1980s. This time against us, to bog us down, bleed us to bankruptcy, and create a choking life for the American people under the tyranny of our security state. And after the last 20 years of war in Afghanistan and across the Middle East, we have less influence there than ever before. A $30 trillion national debt. Note that in neoconservative doctrine, democracy absolutely must be spread to Afghanistan, Iran, Iraq, Libya, and Syria, but not Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, Qatar, Kuwait, UAE, Oman, Egypt, or Pakistan. And if there's a democratically elected government that our government doesn't like, the U.S. won't hesitate to try to overthrow it, like in Algeria in 1993, Gaza in 2007, Egypt in 2013, and Ukraine in 2004 and 2014. Now, to the regime changes, I'm sorry I have to skip Kosovo and Somalia for time. First on our list is President Carter and Reagan's support for the Mujahideen in Afghanistan in the 1980s to overthrow the communist regime there. This led directly to the rise of Haqqani, Hekmatyar, the Taliban, and al-Qaeda. Carter and Reagan's support for Saddam Hussein's Iraq in its 1980s war to overthrow the Ayatollah in Iran also backfired. It solidified the mullah's power in Persia and led directly to the so-called Gulf War, after Iraq invaded Kuwait in a dispute over debts from the war against Iran. As mentioned, America's first Iraq War, launched to restore the Kuwaiti monarchy in 1991, led directly to the dual containment policy against Iraq and Iran from military bases in Saudi Arabia and al-Qaeda's war against the United States. Since 2001, after failing to deploy enough reinforcements to capture or kill bin Laden at Tora Bora or allow the Delta Force to pursue him into Pakistan, the Bush administration instead sought regime change against the Taliban in Kabul, who Bill Clinton had supported just a few years before in their own regime change against the Mujahideen warlords whom Presidents Carter and Reagan had supported against the communists in the 1980s. This led to 20 years of war, including a massive so-called surge escalation halfway through for absolutely nothing, and leading to the Taliban walking right back into power as the U.S. withdrew in the summer of 2021. The U.S. took their side in all three. In Libya, the Hawks said they had to intervene to overthrow secular dictator Gaddafi to protect the poor civilians. But at the very least, tens of thousands of people have been killed in endless fighting in that country in the decades since. Bin Ladenite groups, veterans of the Second Iraq War, led that revolt and have thrived in the meantime as civil war has raged for years. Some warlords brought back literal chattel slavery of sub-Saharan Africans. Thousands of refugees drown in the Mediterranean. The war spread from Libya into Mali, Chad, Niger, Sierra Leone, Burkina Faso, and Nigeria. For the last 6.5 years, the U.S. has backed Saudi Arabia and UAE in a war that has killed hundreds of thousands of people and also strengthened al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula beyond belief. Speaking of Russia, it isn't just the Mideast wars. In Georgia, the U.S. supported the Rose Revolution of 2003 and the installation of Mikhail Saakashvili, who almost got us into a war with Russia when he attacked their peacekeeping forces in South Ossetia just 5 years later, and Vice President Cheney urged George Bush to strike Russian forces coming across the Caucasus Mountains. The U.S. also helped to overthrow the government of Ukraine twice, in 2004 and 2014. In 2014, they used actual Nazis in a street putsch against the elected government. What happened in Ukraine in 2014? America sponsored real Nazis, not just neo-Nazis, but the proud grandsons of the Galatian SS who had perpetrated the Holocaust in Ukraine against Jews and Poles there. The right sector, the Svoboda Party, formerly called the Social Nationalist Party, and the Azov Battalion, all of whom proudly fly swastikas and commit crimes against minorities in Ukraine. You also heard, and this goes back to his original statement at the beginning here, that the U.S. has kept the peace in the world for 75 years. And he did mention Korea and Vietnam, and that's all, but he didn't mention that we killed 2 million Koreans. Somewhere between 3 and 5 million. Nobody really knows how many Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians were killed. And then, of course, the domino fell. It was knocked over by America and spread communism to Cambodia and led directly to the rise of Pol Pot and another 2 million dead there. He didn't count the million dead Iraqis or the million dead, and I got to talk about Obama's intervention in Syria. He didn't talk about the million dead Iraqis, the 500,000 dead Syrians and Pakistanis and Afghans and Libyans and now Yemenis, where at the very minimum 250,000 people have been killed. Certainly in the war in Somalia, which helped lead to the famine of 2011 through 13, something like 250,000 people died in that famine, most of them children under the age of 5, just like who's dying of cholera in the war in Yemen, inflicted by the Americans and their allies who bombed the hospitals, bombed the water and the sewage and the electricity and all of the means of civilian support there in that country. And now it's just not true, and I don't know who told you this, but you might know that Edward Snowden leaked the black budget to the Washington Post, and they published it. Obama spent $1 billion a year on the war in Syria, and he admitted it. I'm sorry, I meant to mention earlier real quick here, when I was talking about the 2 million dead in Korea and the 3 million in Vietnam and the 1.5 million or 2 killed in America's Middle East wars just in the last 20 years, the people who always get left out of that are the people of Indonesia and East Timor and Bangladesh and Guatemala, of course. 500,000 dead in the civil war caused by the American coup in Guatemala. And, of course, El Salvador and Nicaragua, all throughout the Middle East. And these are essentially massacres and pseudo-genocides, even in some cases, perpetrated by American puppets, American compliant governments, and governments protected by the United States of America. For example, Gerald Ford gave the green light for the massacre of the East Timorese in Indonesia in 1975. Richard Nixon gave the green light for the Pakistanis to carry out their atrocities in Bangladesh, and et cetera, et cetera. He always says, not just tonight, but always, America has kept the peace for 75 years. Are only white lives important? Does it only matter that Russia hasn't fought Germany again? And these other people's lives just don't count? The USA has killed a Holocaust worth of civilians
Okay, let's
in the
summarize
last
it there, Scott.
75 years.